Welcome to Whispers in the Dark. Imagine being deep in the woods, surrounded by silence, when a terrifying figure steps out of the shadows. Eyes glowing, movement unnatural, an ancient curse, creatures stalking your every step, and a sacrifice that must be made to survive. But what happens when the true horror is revealed? Keep listening. You won't believe what happens next. Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark to support the channel and ensure more chilling tales come your way. The air in the Smoky Mountains hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint fragrance of wildflowers as the trio trudged along the narrow trail. Jack, an experienced hiker with a weathered face and eyes that had seen more mountains than most could count, led the way. His boots were heavy, each step a mark of years spent conquering rough terrain. Sarah, bright-eyed and adventurous, followed closely behind, her enthusiasm for the wilderness evident in every skip of her step. Mike, the seasoned guide, kept a steady pace, always scanning the trail for potential hazards and looking over his shoulder every few minutes. Something about this place made him uneasy. They were heading deep into the Smokies, along one of the more remote trails, known to few and frequented by even fewer. The area was renowned for its breathtaking views, but more ominously, for the unsettling stories that local hikers whispered behind closed doors. Disappearances, strange noises at night, and rumors of something not quite human lurking just beyond the tree line. As the group ascended higher into the mountains, the temperature began to drop, and the thick blanket of trees overhead cast the forest floor in shadow. The path twisted and turned, cutting through dense thickets of brush, and the only sound was the rhythmic crunch of their boots on the gravel-strewn earth. But as they ventured deeper, the trail seemed to lose its inviting warmth. A strange tension hung in the air, something thick and oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Sarah, usually full of stories and jokes, fell silent, her eyes darting from tree to tree as though she felt something watching her. Jack noticed it too, the hair on the back of his neck prickling in a way he couldn't explain. They had come to this trail to escape the mundane, the noise of the world, the hustle of life. But now something was wrong. It wasn't just the quiet. It was a silence so complete it felt unnatural. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing, and the wind, usually a constant companion in the mountains, had abandoned them. The woods felt too still, as if waiting for something to happen. "Jack, do you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack slowed his pace and listened, his sharp senses immediately catching on to the soft rustling that seemed to move just out of reach. The wind had picked up again, but it wasn't the wind that caused the leaves to stir. It was something else, something too deliberate, too controlled. They all stopped, straining to hear. "Probably just a deer," Mike said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "They've been known to move in odd ways around here." But Jack wasn't convinced. The sound wasn't right. It wasn't the quick, erratic movement of a deer, but something slower, heavier, more purposeful. They resumed walking, but now every step was cautious, the unease creeping into their minds. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon the campsite. The clearing was barely visible through the trees. The remnants of what once might have been a well-kept camp were now nothing more than broken equipment in disarray. A faded, torn tent lay half-collapsed against a fallen log, its poles bent and broken, like some animal had torn it apart. The campfire ring, long cold, was surrounded by a few scattered personal items. A rusted pan, a few old, weather-worn backpacks, and a weathered tarp in the corner of the clearing. But it was the tree at the edge of the camp that drew their attention. Someone had carved a symbol into the bark, strange and unfamiliar, a tangled knot that didn't resemble anything they'd ever seen. "That's not normal," Sarah muttered, stepping closer to inspect the symbol. It looked old, but not like something made by nature. It was deliberate, jagged lines etched deep into the bark, as though someone had painstakingly carved it by hand. Jack felt a cold shiver slide down his spine, a primal instinct telling him to get out of there. The forest, once silent and still, now seemed to close in around them. He wanted to leave, but Mike held up a hand, stopping them. "We're not far from the peak. Let's stay the night." "We'll leave first thing in the morning," Mike suggested, his voice firm but betraying a hint of uncertainty. The idea of camping here didn't sit well with Jack, but the thought of pushing on in the dark was just as unappealing. Reluctantly, they set up camp, but the sense of foreboding only grew. As night fell, the darkness seemed to swallow the forest whole. The shadows cast by the trees stretched long and unnerving, and the silence, once heavy and suffocating, was now filled with an eerie hum that seemed to vibrate in the air. The wind whispered through the leaves, but there was something wrong about it. It wasn't the gentle rustling of the woods, it was almost alive, as though it had a voice of its own. Around the fire, they tried to talk, to laugh, but the conversation felt forced. Each of them was aware of the tension in the air, the way the shadows seemed to move at the edge of their vision. Jack kept scanning the dark tree line, feeling an unsettling sensation that they were not alone. Then it came. A low, rumbling growl broke the silence, distant but unmistakable. It wasn't the sound of any animal they knew, too deep, too guttural. The hairs on the back of Jack's neck stood up. Mike froze, gaze snapping toward the sound. Then, without warning, the rustling began. The sound of heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving closer to their camp. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The shadows around them grew darker as the footsteps grew louder, closer. Jack stood up, heart racing. The air was thick with dread. "Stay calm," Mike said, but there was a tremor in his voice now, and his usual confidence was gone. "It's probably a bear or something," but Jack knew it wasn't a bear. The steps were too controlled, too deliberate, and whatever it was moving toward them. Suddenly, a figure passed by the edge of the clearing, a tall, dark silhouette that moved with unnatural grace, far too large for a bear or any other animal they'd encountered before. Frozen, they all watched as the figure disappeared into the trees and the growl faded into silence. "What the hell was that?" Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. Then, it happened again. A shadow passed, this time much closer, just at the edge of the firelight. Jack's heart pounded as the shape moved, swift and silent, just out of sight. The whispers started, faint at first, like distant voices carried on the wind. Jack couldn't make out the words, but there was a clear tone of malice in them. Someone was watching them. He could feel it now, the oppressive weight of unseen eyes. Sarah's breath hitched. "We need to leave. Now." But before they could react, the sound of a blood-curdling scream echoed through the forest. A scream so raw and full of terror it sent a shock through their spines. It came from deep within the trees, too far to make out, but unmistakable in its agony. Jack grabbed his pack, but Mike held up a hand. "No, stay calm. We'll be okay. Let's get the fire going higher." But Jack knew that whatever had screamed, whatever was watching them, was not something they could outrun. As they huddled by the fire, something moved again, just out of sight. A shape, too large to be any animal, watching them, waiting. And the worst part, nothing about it felt like an animal. It felt like something that knew them, that had been waiting for them. They heard another growl, closer this time. And in that moment they all knew. The forest had no intention of letting them leave. Something far worse than they could have imagined was out there, and it was coming for them. The air was thick with the weight of dread as the scream echoed through the trees, its sound sharp and piercing, cutting through the stillness of the forest. It wasn't just a scream. It was the sound of something primal, something that carried the weight of years, of anguish, of lives lost to this untamed place. The hairs on the back of Jack's neck stood up, his heart racing as his pulse surged. He didn't need to look at Sarah to know she felt it too. The weight of that scream was something none of them could ignore. "Pack up now," Jack said, his voice tight, uncharacteristically commanding. There was no room for argument. Sarah and Mike moved swiftly, their hands fumbling as they hurried to shove their belongings into their backpacks, their eyes darting around, searching for the unseen source of that terrible cry. The wind had picked up, but it wasn't the wind that rattled the leaves. It was something else, something that made the branches groan and sway, something that made the very air feel suffocating, as if the forest itself was closing in around them. But there was no time to dwell on it. They had to leave. They had to get out. Mike swung his pack over his shoulder, his face drawn tight with concern. "We need to move quickly," he muttered, eyes scanning the horizon. Jack nodded, eyes trained on the trail ahead. He pulled out his compass, trying to get his bearings, but it spun uselessly in his hand, the needle darting erratically. It was almost as if the earth itself had conspired to make their escape impossible. The trail they had followed in had now vanished, swallowed up by the trees, and every direction seemed the same, wrong. "Something's not right," Sarah said, her voice strained. This isn't how it should be." "I know," Jack replied, his voice grim. "Just keep moving. We'll find our way." But no matter how far they walked, they couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was shifting around them, that it was alive and watching, closing in on them with every step. As the hours dragged on, the familiar trail had disappeared entirely, replaced by a twisted, winding path that led them deeper and deeper into the forest. Then they saw them, the footprints. Strange, half-human, half-animal tracks marred the soft earth, their edges jagged, as if they had been dragged through the dirt by something inhuman. The prints were large, too large to be made by any animal Jack had ever seen in these woods. The tracks twisted and turned, leading off the trail and into the dark, unknown part of the forest, where the trees grew dense and the light had begun to fade. "Those aren't from any animal I've seen," Mike said, kneeling down to examine them closely. His face was pale, his hand trembling slightly as he traced the shape of the prints. "These are wrong." The air grew colder with every step they took, the weight of the forest around them pressing in, suffocating them. The whispers in the trees seemed to grow louder, though they couldn't understand the words. It was as if something was speaking to them from the shadows, something ancient and hungry. And then Sarah saw her. The old woman appeared suddenly, emerging from the darkness between the trees. She was bent with age, her frail body wrapped in tattered, earth-colored robes that blended into the surrounding woods. Her face was lined with age and sorrow, her eyes dark and hollow, as if they had seen more than anyone should. She moved with unsettling grace, gliding through the underbrush without disturbing a single leaf. Sarah froze. Who are you?" The woman's lips parted in a smile that seemed to send a chill straight to Sarah's bones. "I am one who watches," she said, her voice low and rasping. "I see all that passes through this place." Her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. "The watchers in the trees." The woman continued, her voice a whisper that seemed to seep into Sarah's very soul. They have always been here. They are the ones who do not belong. And now they watch you, they wait, they hunger. Sarah took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. What do you mean? What's happening here? The old woman's eyes gleamed with an otherworldly knowledge, and she stepped closer, her words dripping with ancient warning. It is not what you see. It is what you do not. Something older than you can fathom, something cursed, stalks these woods. It watches. It waits for those who wander too far, and it will not stop until it feeds. Before Sarah could respond, the woman vanished into the trees, leaving nothing but the rustling of leaves behind. Jack and Mike turned, their faces etched with fear. What did she mean? What's happening to us? Sarah whispered, but Jack was already moving, urging the group to keep going. There was no time to process the encounter. Not now. They had to escape before whatever hunted them found them first. As night fell, the oppressive silence returned, and with it the feeling that they were being watched. The woods had turned against them. The creature that the woman spoke of was real, and it was closer now, its presence a dark shadow that hung over them like a death sentence. They made camp again, but there was no warmth in the fire, no comfort. It crackled and popped, but the light it cast was weak, flickering like it, too, frayed. As the darkness grew deeper, something moved in the distance, just outside the range of their firelight. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed through the trees. A low growl, deep and guttural, vibrated in the ground beneath their feet. They were no longer alone. Jack gripped his knife tightly, his knuckles white. "Stay close," he ordered. His voice was calm, but the tremor in it betrayed his fear. Then from the shadows it came. The creature emerged, half shadow, half beast. Its glowing eyes pierced the dark, unblinking, watching them with a hunger that made Sarah's blood run cold. Its form was blurred, shifting between the trees, moving in ways that defied logic. It was as if it wasn't fully of this world, something ancient, something cursed. Its growl was louder now, closer, a sound that seemed to vibrate through Sarah's chest. And then it moved. Faster than they could react, it was gone, vanishing into the trees as if it had never been there. But the air around them felt heavier, colder, as if the very forest was alive, holding its breath. The creature was close, too close. It was hunting them. As they huddled around the fire, the world outside seemed to vanish. They were trapped, surrounded by a malevolent force older than the mountains themselves. The whispers, the growls, the shadows, they were all part of it. The creature had revealed itself, but it was not alone. It commanded the spirits of the forest to do its bidding. Jack and Mike exchanged looks, both understanding the same thing. They could not fight it. They could not outrun it. They were at its mercy. "We have to leave," Sarah said, her voice breaking. But there was nowhere to go. The forest had closed in around them, and the creature, whatever it was waiting. They were trapped in its domain now, its presence a dark force pressing in on them from every side. The group continued to retreat deeper into the wilderness, not knowing what horrors awaited them or if they would make it out alive. The ancient curse had them in its grip, and the creature would not let them go. It was watching, waiting for the moment when it would strike. And that moment was fast approaching. The worst was yet to come. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light filtering through the thick canopy of trees. The forest, once serene, now seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the very air thick with an unspoken threat. The silence that had once settled comfortably around them now felt like a pressure, pressing in on their shoulders, squeezing the breath from their lungs. With each step they took, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, and the oppressive weight of the forest seemed to drag them further into its depths. Jack's mind raced, his thoughts twisting as he tried to make sense of everything. The scream they had heard earlier still echoed in his ears, a haunting reminder of the presence that stalked them from the shadows. Every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig underfoot seemed to carry the weight of something ancient and malevolent. But it was not just the creature that haunted him. It was the realization that they were no longer in control of their own fate. This forest, these mountains, everything about it felt alive, like a force bound to the land, guiding them towards something far worse than they could ever imagine. As they walked deeper into the forest, Mike noticed the first strange sign. The trees seemed to change, their twisted branches bending in unnatural angles, blocking the path ahead. The ground beneath them seemed to shift, the trail becoming harder to follow. It was as if the very landscape was alive, moving and shifting to prevent them from leaving. The compass, once a reliable tool, now spun in every direction as if mocking their attempts to escape. "It's the forest," Mike said, his voice tight with fear. "It's changing around us." But Jack refused to let panic take over. He had to keep his focus. He had to keep the group together. But the longer they stayed, the more he could feel the curse closing in on them. The whispers in the trees had grown louder, clearer. The wind, which once carried a sense of peace, now felt like a warning. It was as if the forest itself was alive, aware of their every move. The air was thick with the stench of decay, of something ancient and dead. The further they walked, the more the scent clung to the air and the trees grew closer, their trunks twisting in unnatural shapes, their roots reaching out like grasping fingers. It was a feeling Jack couldn't shake, that something was watching them, that they weren't alone in these woods, not by a long shot. It was then that they stumbled upon the ruins. Hidden deep within the forest, veiled by the thick underbrush, was a settlement, old, decayed, and abandoned. The structures, made of rotting wood and crumbling stone, were barely recognizable as homes, the remnants of a past long forgotten. A broken fence lay scattered in the dirt, pieces of charred timber strewn about, evidence of a fire that had ravaged the settlement years, perhaps centuries ago. The air felt heavy here, as though the land itself had absorbed the pain and fear of those who had lived and died here. As they explored the ruins, they found strange markings on the walls, symbols carved into the stone, worn by time but still visible, still chilling in their presence. These symbols, ancient and strange, were not just decorative, they were warnings. Warnings of something that had been disturbed, something that should never have been awakened, something that had been trapped here, bound to the land by a curse that could never be undone. Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine as he traced one of the symbols with his fingers. These aren't just marks, they're part of something bigger. Sarah stepped closer, her voice trembling. "What is this place?" Mike's voice was low, filled with the weight of years of lore. This was a settlement. A group of settlers tried to tame this land, but they disturbed something ancient, a burial ground, the forest. It's not just the land, it's cursed, and whatever was buried here was meant to stay buried. The pieces began to fall into place, but the truth was worse than any of them had imagined. The settlers had unleashed something far older than themselves, something tied to the land, bound to protect the spirits of the dead. The creature that haunted them, the thing that had stalked them through the woods, was not just a wild animal. It was something far darker, an ancient entity, cursed and bound to the forest. It had been waiting for centuries, waiting for someone to come along and disturb the balance, someone to awaken it from its slumber. "The curse," Jack whispered, "it can only be broken when the last living descendant of the settlers is sacrificed." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They weren't just being hunted by a creature. They were being hunted by a force that had been waiting for this moment, and there was no escape from it, no way to outrun it. As they continued deeper into the forest, the sense of doom grew stronger. The landscape around them became even more hostile. The trees twisted and groaned as though alive, their branches reaching down to claw at their skin. The ground beneath them seemed to shift, the once familiar path now obscured by thick roots and rocks that seemed to rise up out of nowhere, blocking their way. It was as if the forest itself was fighting them, pushing them further into its depths. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "What does it want from us?" "The creature," Mike said, his voice tight with fear. "It's been hunting, and it will not stop until it gets what it wants." But what did it want? Jack didn't know. All he knew was that whatever it was, whatever had been awakened, was growing stronger by the minute. The forest itself was becoming part of the hunt, guiding them toward their doom. And then they saw it. The creature emerged from the shadows, its form a twisted blend of shadow and beast. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, its massive body shifting between the trees as if it was part of the very darkness itself. Its growl, deep and guttural, echoed through the woods, sending a shiver down Jack's spine. It wasn't alone. The spirits of the dead, once bound to the land, now followed its every move, their forms barely visible in the mist, their eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. The creature was not just hunting them. It was feeding off them, using their fear to grow stronger, using the forest itself to trap them, to drive them deeper into its lair. And then it came closer. Jack's grip tightened on his knife, but he knew it was useless. The creature was too powerful, they were too weak. And yet they couldn't stop running, couldn't stop fighting, even though they knew it was futile. They were being driven, pushed deeper into the wilderness, into the heart of the curse. It was then that they found it. The altar, hidden beneath the roots of an ancient tree, the blood-soaked altar was a horrifying sight. The stone was cracked, dark stains covering its surface, as though it had been used for centuries to make sacrifices. And as Jack's eyes fell upon it, the realization hit him with crushing force. They were the sacrifice. They had come here to die. It was inevitable, and the curse would not be broken until the final blood was spilled. The forest was closing in. The creature was waiting. The spirits were restless, hungry for the blood they had been denied for so long. And now Jack, Sarah, and Mike had only one choice: to make the sacrifice or be consumed. The chilling truth was clear. The curse had them in its grip, and there was no escape. Only death, only sacrifice, and the hunt had just begun. The wind howled through the trees, a cold, unforgiving gust that swept through the forest like a warning. The deeper Jack, Sarah, and Mike ventured into the woods, the heavier the silence became, like the land itself was holding its breath. The forest, once a place of beauty and wonder, now felt like a labyrinth, a prison with no way out. Each step was heavier than the last, and the shadows that stretched from the twisted trees seemed to grow longer with every passing moment. Jack had never felt so hopeless in his life. His mind raced, his thoughts scrambled, trying desperately to find a way to break the curse, to escape the forest that had turned against them. It wasn't just the creature hunting them anymore. It was the very land itself, a malevolent force, twisted and ancient, that seemed to have an unyielding grip on their fate. They had uncovered the ritual, the way to end it all, to break free from the curse that had bound them to this forest. But the price was too high. One of them had to die. One of them had to offer themselves to the creature, to the entity that had haunted these woods for centuries, to end the bloodshed and the torment. The thought of making the sacrifice was unbearable, yet it was the only way to stop the monster, to stop the forest from consuming them all. Jack had initially felt the weight of the decision pressing on him, but as the days wore on and the terror grew stronger, he realized that they had no choice. The curse would not break unless one of them died. "I'll do it," Sarah said one night, her voice trembling as she spoke the words that no one dared to utter. "I'll be the one to sacrifice myself." Jack's heart clenched in his chest. He shook his head, his eyes filled with horror and disbelief. "No, we'll find another way. We'll fight. There has to be." "There's no other way, Jack," Sarah interrupted, her voice a mixture of fear and determination. "We're running out of time. We can't keep running. The creature won't stop until we're all dead. I can't let that happen." Mike stood by silently, his face pale, his eyes haunted. He had been through countless hikes, countless situations, but this was different. There was nothing in his experience that could prepare him for the terror they were now facing. He wanted to speak, to object, but the words stuck in his throat. The guilt, the fear, the helplessness, everything about this situation was suffocating. "I can't ask you to do this," Jack whispered, his voice hoarse. "We'll figure something else out." But Sarah was resolute. "It's the only way." As night descended upon them, the forest grew darker, more oppressive, the shadows closing in around them like the jaws of some unseen beast. The wind picked up again, but this time it wasn't just the wind. It was the creature, closer than ever before, sensing their fear, sensing their desperation. They could feel its presence, thick and suffocating, as if the very air itself had turned against them. And then it came. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the forest, too low to be anything they had ever heard before. The trees creaked and groaned under the weight of something ancient, something immense. The creature was no longer a distant fear. It was real, and it was hunting them. The ground trembled as it approached, the force of its power causing the earth to shake beneath their feet. Mike was the first to notice it. He turned, his eyes wide with fear, his body rigid as he stared into the darkness. "It's here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Before anyone could react, the creature struck. It moved too fast, too fluidly, as if it wasn't bound by the rules of nature. One moment Mike was standing by the fire, and the next he was gone. No sound, no warning, just the eerie silence that followed. The group's hearts raced as they spun around, searching the darkness, but Mike was gone, swallowed by the forest in the blink of an eye. Jack screamed his name, but the only response was the low, rumbling growl from the shadows. Mike's screams echoed in the distance, fading as if being pulled away by an unseen force. The creature had taken him, and there was nothing they could do. The panic set in like wildfire. They had lost Mike, and now they were alone. The creature was hunting them, and they couldn't outrun it. With fear clawing at his chest, Jack turned to Sarah, his eyes frantic. "We have to finish this. We have to break the curse." Sarah nodded, her face pale, her lips trembling as she looked toward the heart of the forest. They couldn't run anymore. They couldn't hide. The only way out was to confront the creature, to face it head-on and offer the sacrifice that would end it all. With every step they took deeper into the forest, Jack could feel the air grow heavier, the trees closing in around them, suffocating them. It was as if the forest itself was alive, pushing them forward toward their doom. The ground was uneven beneath their feet, twisted roots and jagged rocks making each step a battle. The shadows were deeper now, darker, and the whispers were louder, as though the spirits of the forest were closing in on them, urging them forward. They reached the clearing, the heart of the curse, and there, Waiting for them was the creature. It emerged from the trees, its eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light, its body a twisted amalgamation of shadow and beast. Its fur was matted, its skin twisted and deformed, its limbs far too long for any creature of the natural world. Its growl rumbled in the air like thunder, vibrating through Jack's chest, making his heart pound in his ears. It was monstrous, more terrifying than anything he had ever imagined. Jack's hand tightened around the knife, the last weapon he had left, but he knew it was useless. The creature was too strong. It was the embodiment of the forest's curse, a force of nature that they couldn't fight. "This is it," Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is the only way." Sarah stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "I'm ready." But just as she moved to offer herself to the creature, Jack lunged forward, his mind clouded by fear and desperation. He stabbed at the creature, but it was too fast, too powerful. The knife passed harmlessly through its shadowy form, and with a roar the creature swiped at him, sending him crashing to the ground. He lay there, gasping for breath, his body bruised and broken, but his eyes locked onto Sarah's. She was still standing, still ready to make the sacrifice. "Don't!" Jack screamed, his voice hoarse. "Please don't do it." But Sarah, with tears streaming down her face, shook her head. "It's the only way, Jack. I have to do this to save us, to stop the curse." And with that she stepped forward, offering herself to the creature, her body trembling with fear but her resolve unbroken. The creature lunged and the world went black. In the darkness, Jack's vision blurred, his mind spinning as he fought to stay conscious. The forest seemed to close in around him, the weight of the curse pressing down on him, suffocating him. The air was thick with the scent of blood, and he knew deep down that they had paid the price. But as the shadows consumed him, a flicker of hope remained. Perhaps the curse was finally broken. But then the whispers began again, louder than ever. And Jack realized with a sinking feeling in his chest that the creature was not gone. It had only just begun. The forest was alive with a terrifying energy, its stillness now charged with an oppressive force. Jack, bloodied and broken, staggered forward, his vision blurred and his breath ragged. His mind was a whirlwind of panic, desperation, and a flickering hope that had started to die in the shadows. The creature, no longer just an entity of darkness but something more, loomed over him. It was not just the beast of the forest, but the embodiment of something far older, far more dangerous. With every step he took, the forest seemed to close in tighter. The trees, their gnarled limbs twisted like hands reaching for him, seemed to lean closer, their eyes, if they had them, trained on his every movement. The whispers that had followed them from the moment they entered this cursed land were now deafening, crawling into his mind like an infestation, gnawing at the edges of his sanity. He had seen Sarah, the last glimmer of hope, the final shred of humanity they had left, standing tall, resolute in her decision. She had volunteered knowing the cost. She had sacrificed herself to end the curse, to free the souls trapped in the forest, and to end this nightmare once and for all. But as the final moments approached, Jack realized that the battle they were fighting was not just physical. It was a war of souls, of ancient forces far beyond their comprehension. The creature's power seemed to grow as Sarah stepped forward, her figure bathed in the dim light of the forest. Her eyes were filled with a mix of fear and determination, but Jack could see the resignation in them. She had accepted the inevitable. She was the only one left who could break the curse. She was the only one who could put an end to the ancient entity's reign. But just as Sarah was about to offer herself, to make the ultimate sacrifice, something happened. The air grew colder, colder than it had ever been. It wasn't the chill of the forest, it was the coldness of the grave. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees in a mournful cry, and suddenly there was a shift in the atmosphere. The air thickened, as if the very earth was holding its breath. The spirits of the dead settlers, once bound to the land, began to stir. Their presence was not something that could be seen, but something felt, like an overwhelming weight pressing on their hearts. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, as if the forest itself was waking up, stretching after a long, terrible sleep. And then the voices came. Faint at first, like whispers in the wind, but growing stronger, louder, more insistent. The souls of the settlers, the ones who had been trapped by the curse, were awakening. They were not at rest. They were not free. The creature had enslaved them, using their souls to fuel its power, to gain control over the living. The spirits that had once walked this land were now twisted, used as pawns in a game far beyond their understanding. They had been sacrificed, their lives stolen to feed the beast that lurked in the forest, growing stronger with every soul it consumed. The whispers turned into a cacophony, a dissonant chorus of voices from the past. The spirits, their voices laden with pain and regret, revealed the truth. The entity had used them, twisted them, turning them into something that fed off the living. They had been bound to the land, forced to protect the forest and the creature that haunted it. But now, as the ritual approached its final moments, they were free, or at least they had the chance to be. And that was when Jack understood. This wasn't just about stopping the creature. It was about releasing the souls trapped here, about ending the cycle of torment that had bound them to the forest for centuries. Sarah's sacrifice wasn't just a way to break the curse. It was a way to redeem the souls of the dead, to give them a chance at peace. But as Sarah stood there, preparing herself for the ultimate act of selflessness, the forest seemed to come alive with a fury they hadn't expected. The creature, now fully revealed in its monstrous form, stepped out of the shadows, its glowing eyes burning with a hunger that could never be satisfied. The air was thick with its power, its presence suffocating and overwhelming. It was not just a beast, it was a force, an ancient, dark force that had been feeding on fear and death for centuries. The creature roared, a sound so guttural, so full of rage, that it seemed to shake the very trees around them. It lunged toward Sarah, its twisted form a blur of darkness and malice. But Jack, desperate and reckless, threw himself in front of her, his body a shield, though he knew it was futile. He had nothing left to fight with. His knife was useless against this thing. It was a force of nature, something that could not be stopped by mere human hands. "Sarah, no!" Jack screamed, his voice raw with desperation. But it was too late. She was already stepping forward, her arms outstretched, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. The creature hesitated, as if sensing something, its eyes narrowing in suspicion. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The forest, the wind, even the whispers fell silent. And then Sarah spoke, her voice steady, though tears glistened in her eyes. "I do this for them," she whispered. "For the souls who never found peace, for the ones who were trapped by this curse. I do this for all of us." And with that she fell to her knees, offering herself to the creature, her body trembling but resolute. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The creature lunged, but as it touched her, something shifted. The air crackled with energy and the ground trembled beneath them. The very fabric of the curse began to unravel, the spirits of the settlers swirling around Sarah, their voices rising in a final cry of release. The creature howled in rage, its form shifting and flickering as if it were made of smoke and shadow. It tried to fight, to hold on to the power it had stolen, but it was weakening. For a brief moment, Jack thought it was over. He thought the curse had been broken, that Sarah had freed them all. But then the ground cracked open beneath them. The creature let out a final, deafening scream as the forest seemed to fight back, its ancient power unraveling. The spirits, once trapped, were now free. The forest, once dark and alive with the curse, was now silent, still, and lifeless. But the cost had been great. Sarah's body lay motionless on the ground, her face peaceful, her eyes closed in a final, eternal rest. Jack fell to his knees beside her, his heart heavy with grief. He had lost her. She had given everything, and the curse had been broken. But at what cost? The forest fell silent. The entity was gone, but the damage was done. As Jack looked up at the trees, now standing still and lifeless, he knew that Sarah's sacrifice had saved them all. But it had come at the highest price. And though the curse was broken, the forest had claimed its toll. It was over. But Jack knew that, no matter how far he ran, the memories of what had happened here would never leave him. The forest had taken something from him, and he would never be the same. The end had come, but the echoes of the curse lingered, and the spirits would never truly be at rest. The forest stood still, unnaturally quiet after the storm of terror had passed. The very air around Jack felt thick, like the land itself was absorbing every breath he took. He had always imagined that, once the curse was broken, the world would somehow return to normal. That somehow, once the entity was gone and Sarah's sacrifice was made, the forest would release its hold on them. But nothing felt normal. The land was dead, the trees no longer whispered. Instead, they stood like skeletal sentinels, their twisted limbs casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to stretch further with each passing moment. Jack knelt beside Sarah, her lifeless form lying in the clearing where the ritual had been performed. He touched her face, his fingers brushing against the cold skin. The peace on her face was the only comfort he could cling to now, the only reassurance that her sacrifice had not been in vain. But that peace was fleeting, a hollow shell compared to the horrors that still clung to him. The spirits of the dead settlers were free, yes, but their presence still lingered in the air like a thick fog. They had been released, but they were not at rest. Jack could feel them now all around him, their mournful whispers echoing in the back of his mind. They were no longer trapped by the curse, but they had not found peace. Not yet. As he rose from Sarah's side, the ground beneath him seemed to shift, as though the earth itself had begun to breathe again. He turned, and there, just out of sight, were the spirits, the lost souls of those who had died in the forest long ago. Their forms were hazy, translucent, their eyes filled with an unfathomable sorrow. They moved like shadows, drifting silently through the air, never fully materializing, yet always present. "Jack!" A voice, faint and broken, called out to him. He spun, searching the trees, but saw nothing. "Jack!" It was a woman's voice, one he didn't recognize, and yet it sounded familiar. He stepped toward it, his heart heavy with both fear and a strange sense of duty. He had to know. He had to understand what had happened here, what Sarah's sacrifice had truly meant. The figure of a woman appeared before him, her face pale and twisted in anguish. Her eyes, once full of life, now held the depth of centuries of torment. She reached out to him, her hand stretching through the air, the coldness of her touch freezing his skin as she spoke. "You don't understand, do you?" she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 lost souls. "The curse was not only the creature, it was the land itself. It fed on our souls, on our pain, and now it feeds on yours." Jack stepped back, his chest tightening. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely more than a rasp. "I thought it was over. I thought you were free." The spirit's hollow gaze bore into him, her lips curling into a sorrowful smile. We were never free. The curse wasn't just bound to the creature, it was bound to this land, to all of us. And when one is sacrificed, the balance shifts. The forest remains alive. Jack's breath caught in his throat. What does that mean? What does that mean for us? The spirit's form flickered, growing fainter with each passing moment. It means the curse is not broken, not truly. The forest may be still, but it is never at rest. It feeds on those who enter, and it will never stop. With those final words, the spirit vanished, her form dissolving into the mist, leaving Jack standing alone in the clearing, the weight of her words crushing him. The return to civilization was nothing like Jack had imagined. The world had continued on as it always did, unaware of the horror he had just endured. The roads were the same, the buildings untouched, the people oblivious to the terror that had unfolded in the forest. Jack thought that maybe, just maybe, he could leave it all behind, that he could walk away and pretend none of it had ever happened. But the nightmares came, the memories. The faces of the lost souls haunted him in his sleep, their mournful eyes following him everywhere. And Sarah, her image was etched into his mind, a constant reminder of the price of survival. The world around him seemed normal, but Jack knew the truth. He had seen it, he had lived it. The forest, the curse, the entity, it wasn't over. It couldn't be. He tried to explain what had happened, to tell someone, anyone, about the horrors he had witnessed. But the words wouldn't come out right. He couldn't make them believe. How could he? Who would believe the tale of a cursed forest, of creatures that moved between shadows, of ancient spirits bound to the land, of a sacrifice that had failed to end it all? It was the look in their eyes, the pity, the disbelief, that made him stop. He had tried to tell Sarah's story, to make them understand the true horror, but he knew that it was useless. How could anyone believe something so impossible? But then, just as the weight of everything seemed unbearable, he received a message. The letter came unexpectedly, slipped under his door late one night. The handwriting was familiar, but at first Jack didn't recognize it. It was written in a shaky, desperate script, the ink smeared in places as if written in haste. "Jack," it began, "it's not over. The forest is still alive, and so is it. The curse was never broken. I saw it. I saw them. They are still watching. They will never stop. Not until it has all been done. The last one, he is waiting." Jack's heart froze as he read the final words, the realization sinking in like a knife in his gut. It was Sarah, but it couldn't be. She had sacrificed herself. She was gone, or so he thought. The message wasn't just a warning. It was a cry for help, a cry from beyond the grave, a reminder that the forest's hunger had never truly been satisfied. The entity was still there, still feeding, still waiting for the next sacrifice. Jack sat on the floor, his hands trembling, the weight of the letter in his palms. The curse hadn't ended with Sarah's death. It hadn't ended at all. The forest had never truly released its hold on them. The spirits had never found peace. And now they were calling to him, calling him back to finish what had been started. The forest was not done. The creature was not gone, and Jack realized, with horror creeping down his spine, that he might never be free. The whispers would never stop, and neither would the hunt. The moon hung like a silent witness in the sky as Jack stood at the edge of the forest, staring into the blackened void that had once been the heart of his nightmare. The cold wind rustled the leaves, but the air felt heavier now, charged with a presence he could almost feel, a presence that seemed to pulse from the very depths of the earth. Every step he took into the woods felt like a step closer to something far older, far darker than he could comprehend. But he couldn't turn back. Not now. The creatures, the spirits, the curse, it had all started here. And here he believed it would end. Jack's journey back to the forest was one he had fought against for months. The nightmares had followed him, the faces of the lost souls from the past haunting his dreams, begging for release. But the message Sarah had left, the cryptic warning from beyond the grave, had driven him back. He knew now that the forest, the entity, the curse, it had never been truly broken. Not by her sacrifice, not by the creature's defeat. Something had remained, something he had overlooked, and it was waiting for him, waiting for the final piece to fall into place. The air smelled different now, sharper, as if the forest was alive with a hunger that went beyond the natural world. It was waiting, too, as if it knew what Jack had come for. As he moved deeper into the woods, the path seemed to shift. The familiar trail he had walked so many times before had changed. The trees, gnarled and twisted, leaned in closer, their branches reaching out like fingers, clawing at the air. The wind whispered at first, a soft murmur in the distance, but soon growing louder, as if the forest itself was trying to speak to him. Jack's breath caught in his throat as the whispers grew more distinct. Voices, soft at first, then rising to a crescendo, began to echo through the trees, their words unintelligible but full of urgency. The spirits, he realized, were speaking to him, warning him, but there was no turning back now. He couldn't allow himself to be deterred. "Jack, you shouldn't be here, it's still alive." The voice came from just beyond his vision, too faint to catch but too close to ignore. His heart pounded, and for a moment he hesitated. His feet faltered, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Leave this place, it will never let you go." But Jack didn't turn. He couldn't. Not with the knowledge that if he didn't confront this evil now, it would forever haunt him, consume him as it had consumed Sarah. He pushed forward, his steps firm despite the weight of dread that pressed against him. The deeper he went, the more the forest seemed to close in around him, the trees bending unnaturally toward him, their limbs creaking and groaning in a way that made his skin crawl. The whispers grew into voices, more clear now, more insistent. The spirits that had once been trapped in the forest seemed to rise from the ground itself, their forms swirling around Jack in a hazy, ethereal dance. Their faces were twisted in agony, their eyes hollow with the pain of centuries of imprisonment. He could hear them now, their pleas growing louder with each step he took. "Free us, please, release us." But Jack kept moving, the weight of their sorrow pressing on him with each passing moment. He had to end it. He had to put an end to this madness. And then, as he stepped deeper into the heart of the forest, he saw it. The clearing, the place where it all began, the place where Sarah had sacrificed herself. The altar, now covered in vines and overgrown with moss, still stood, a silent testament to the price they had all paid. But it was different now. There was something wrong with it, something that made the hairs on the back of Jack's neck stand on end. The air around it felt thick, charged, like the very ground beneath him was alive with a force he couldn't comprehend. Jack stepped forward, his breath catching as the shadows around the altar seemed to shift. The creature, the entity, was there, hidden in the dark corners of the clearing, watching him, waiting. It was no longer just a beast, no longer just the creature that had stalked him through the woods. It was something more. Something ancient, something bound to the land. It was the forest itself, and Jack had no choice but to face it. The shadows parted and the creature emerged. It was not what Jack had expected. It was no longer the twisted, monstrous form that had haunted him before. Now it was more refined, more intelligent. Its eyes burned with an unnatural light, glowing like the embers of a dying fire, and its body rippled with shadows as though it was not fully of this world. It was not just a beast, it was a force, an ancient entity bound to the earth, to the forest, to the souls of the dead, and it was hungry. The ground beneath Jack's feet trembled as the creature moved closer, its form flickering like smoke in the wind. It didn't speak, but Jack could feel its presence pressing in on him, suffocating him as if it were trying to force him to give up, to bow to its will. "You cannot escape." The creature finally spoke, its voice a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo in Jack's mind. "You are mine, you always have been." Jack's heart raced. The creature's words seemed to reverberate through his very soul, but he fought against the rising fear. He knew what he had to do. He had to end this. He had to finish it. He was the last one standing, the last one to confront this evil. Drawing the last of his strength, Jack reached into his bag and pulled out the ancient book of rituals they had discovered. His hands trembled as he opened it, his eyes scanning the pages for the final incantation, the final step to banish the creature once and for all. As he spoke the words, the ground beneath him cracked open, the earth splitting apart as though the forest itself was rebelling against the ritual. The shadows of the forest seemed to writhe, contorting into shapes that defied reason, twisting into forms that made Jack's skin crawl. The creature roared in fury, but Jack didn't stop. He couldn't. The creature lunged toward him, its claws outstretched, its fangs bared, but Jack stood his ground, his voice growing louder, more forceful as he recited the final lines of the ritual. The creature howled in agony as the ground began to tremble beneath them. The earth cracked wide open, and the forest seemed to come alive in a frenzy of dark energy, fighting against the ritual, against Jack's attempt to break the curse. But it was too late. With one final, deafening roar, the creature's form began to unravel, its dark power dissipating into the air like smoke. The trees, once twisted and unnatural, straightened, their branches no longer reaching for him. The whispers, once deafening, fell silent. Jack fell to his knees, exhausted, his body shaking from the effort. The forest around him was still, the air thick with the weight of what had just transpired. He had done it. He had ended the curse. But as he sat there, breathing heavily, staring at the place where the creature had been, a terrible realization swept over him. The forest was still alive. The curse was broken, but its echo would never fade. The entity may have been banished, but the forest would always hunger. The spirits that had once been trapped here were free, but so was the darkness. It had never truly left. The silence was deafening. And Jack understood in that moment that the forest would never truly release its grip on him. The hunt was over, but the memories would remain, the shadows forever whispering, waiting for the next soul to cross into its depths. Jack turned and left the clearing, but as he walked, the whispers followed, carried on the wind, brushing against his ears as if they were never far behind. The shadows of the forest lingered in his mind, the horrors of the past haunting his every step. The forest was done with him, but he would never be done with the forest, and the whispers would never stop. The forest was a living, breathing nightmare, its ancient roots twisting and groaning beneath Jack's feet as he ventured deeper into the heart of its darkened depths. The shadows, once familiar, now seemed to move with a life of their own, coiling around him, drawing him into their suffocating embrace. The trees stood tall and silent, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, brushing against his skin, as though they were pulling him closer to something that would end his existence forever. The air was thick with the stench of decay, of something ancient and foul. Jack could feel it in his bones, the presence of the entity waiting for him, watching from the depths of the forest as old as the land itself. It had been waiting, lurking, feeding on the fear and pain of those who had wandered into its grasp. And now it was time to face it, time to end it. As he pressed forward, the whispers returned, rising in volume, in intensity. He could hear them now, echoing in the back of his mind, their voices layered together, a chorus of lost souls trapped by the curse. Leave, Jack, leave before it's too late. But there was no turning back, not now. The creature's power had grown since Sarah's sacrifice, a dark and insidious force that had taken hold of the forest and perhaps even the very land itself. Jack knew that the only way to break the cycle, to truly end the curse, was to confront it head-on. He had to face the entity in the heart of its power, where it was strongest, where it had laid its roots deep into the earth. It had claimed so many lives, and now it was time for him to take back what had been stolen. The clearing came into view, a vast expanse of dead earth, the remnants of what had once been a vibrant, living part of the forest. The trees surrounding it were twisted and knotted, their bark blackened and scarred, as though the very soil beneath them had been corrupted. And there, standing at the center of it all, was the altar. The same altar where Sarah had made her sacrifice, the same place where the curse had taken root. But it was different now. The air felt heavier, charged with an unnatural energy, as if the land itself was alive with an unquenchable thirst for power. Jack's heart hammered in his chest, his every step reverberating in the silence, as though the forest was holding its breath, waiting for the final confrontation. And then it appeared. The creature, the entity that had haunted him since his first steps into this cursed land, stepped from the shadows. But it was no longer the twisted, monstrous thing it had once been. It was something more, something darker, something that had absorbed the very essence of the forest, its power grown from the suffering of the dead. It had changed. It had become one with the land. Its form was ever shifting, like smoke, like darkness itself. Its glowing eyes pierced through the blackness, burning with a hunger that would never be satisfied. Its body was an amalgamation of shadows, flickering and pulsing, with limbs that stretched unnaturally long, clawed fingers scraping against the earth. It moved with an unsettling fluidity, as though it was part of the forest, part of the very darkness that had consumed everything in its path. Jack stood frozen, his heart racing in his chest, his hand gripping the knife that had once seemed like a weapon of hope, but now felt insignificant in the face of the entity. The ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble, as if the forest was alive, with an energy that vibrated in his bones. The creature hissed, its voice low and guttural, a sound that reverberated through Jack's skull, rattling his thoughts. "You cannot escape," it said, its voice seeping into the very air around them. "You are part of this forest now, you have always been, and you will die here just like the others." Jack's jaw clenched, his eyes never leaving the creature's glowing form. "I'm not like the others," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "And neither are you." The entity growled, a sound that echoed through the forest like thunder. It lunged forward with impossible speed, its claws reaching for Jack, its shadowy tendrils wrapping around him, pulling him toward the center of the cursed land. But Jack was ready. He raised the knife, driven by a force greater than fear, greater than the terror that had haunted him for so long. He thrust it forward, piercing the creature's form, but it passed through it like smoke, the blade going right through it as if the entity were nothing more than a wisp of darkness. Jack stumbled back, his body trembling with the realization that this was no simple beast. It was not something that could be defeated with a blade. It was a force, a curse, something ancient and deeply embedded in the earth itself. But Jack knew one thing: he could not stop now. He could not fail. Not after everything Sarah had sacrificed. Not after everything they had lost. The ground beneath him began to crack open, the earth splitting apart as though the very fabric of reality was breaking. The spirits of the dead settlers rose from the ground, their forms ethereal and flickering, their eyes hollow and full of sorrow. They were trapped, bound to this land, to this creature. And now they too sought redemption. They reached for Jack, their spectral hands brushing against him, their whispers growing louder, urging him to finish what had been started. The creature roared in anger, its form flickering violently, its power surging. It seemed to draw strength from the souls, from the land itself. But it also seemed to weaken, its form becoming less stable, less solid. Jack could see it now, the heart of the curse, the source of its power, buried deep within the earth beneath the altar. He had to destroy it. He had to sever the bond that tied the entity to this land. With a final, desperate surge of strength, Jack plunged the knife into the ground, into the very heart of the curse. The earth screamed in agony, the forest groaning as though it were being torn apart. The creature shrieked, its form unraveling, its power dissipating into the air like smoke. The spirits wailed, their cries rising in a cacophony of sorrow and release as they were freed from their torment. The forest trembled, the ground shifting beneath Jack's feet, and for a brief moment everything was still. The creature was gone. The curse was broken. But Jack knew that nothing could ever be the same again. The forest was silent now, its oppressive weight gone, but the air still felt thick, as though the land was mourning the destruction of its ancient power. Jack collapsed to his knees, his body exhausted, his mind reeling from the weight of everything that had happened. Sarah's sacrifice had been the catalyst, but he had finished what she had started. The curse had been broken, the entity destroyed, but at what cost? The forest around him was quiet, but Jack knew the truth. The forest would never forget. The shadows would always remain, lurking at the edges of his mind. The spirits of the dead, though freed, would never truly rest. The hunger of the forest would never be satisfied. And Jack would never be free, not really. The whispers of the forest, the echoes of the curse, would always haunt him. The morning light barely touched the ground as Jack stood at the edge of the forest, staring into the thick trees that now seemed so deceptively calm. The wind had stopped. The leaves, once trembling in fear, hung still in the air as though even nature itself was unsure of what had just occurred. The forest, the thing that had consumed so many lives and dreams, was now silent. And yet Jack could feel its weight pressing on him, even from this distance. He hadn't left the woods unscathed. The creature was gone. The entity, the curse that had haunted these lands for centuries, had been destroyed. The blood-soaked altar, once a symbol of unspeakable terror, was now a barren stone, but something lingered. The land had been tainted not by the creature itself, but by the echoes of its existence. The spirits that had been freed, those who had been trapped in the endless cycle of torment, had left their mark. Their pain, their sorrow, their hunger for redemption were still etched in the very air around him. The forest had been quieted, yes, but Jack could feel it. Something dark, something lingering, still lay beneath the surface, and Jack was left with the heavy weight of their unspoken cries, their suffering now intertwined with his own. There was no victory here, only a fragile peace, one that he feared would shatter with the slightest movement. The forest was not done with him. No, it never would be. He had returned to the world, his world, after what felt like an eternity, yet it didn't feel like home. The streets seemed far too bright, the people too oblivious. Life had resumed its normal course, but Jack couldn't fit in. How could he? How could anyone understand the darkness that had plagued him? The things he had seen, the horrors that had haunted him. His once simple life, his job, his friends, his home, felt like a distant memory, a life that no longer made sense. He tried to speak, tried to explain to those who had asked, to those who had wondered where he had been, what had happened to him, but his words faltered. His story was too dark, too impossible. No one believed him. How could they? Who would believe in a cursed forest, a creature that was part of the very fabric of the earth, a dark force that had fed on the souls of the dead for centuries? It was too far-fetched, too unbelievable. And so Jack remained silent. He withdrew into himself, into the memories that still clung to him like a shroud. The faces of the lost souls, their eyes filled with desperation, still haunted him. The whispers that had followed him from the depths of the forest, they still echoed in the back of his mind. Every corner of his life was touched by the shadows of what had happened. The woods, the spirits, the entity, it all followed him. There were moments when the air around him would grow heavy, thick with the same sense of dread he had felt deep in the forest. The whispers would return, faint at first, then louder, just beyond his reach. The spirits of the dead were still out there, their voices haunting the corners of his mind, their sorrow a constant reminder of what had transpired. But it wasn't just the whispers. It was the shadows, the ones that seemed to stretch and flicker at the edge of his vision. The ones that never quite disappeared, that never quite left him. He would turn a corner, and for a moment he would see them. A shape, a figure, too dark, too real to be a mere trick of the light. His breath would catch in his chest, his heart would race, and in that moment, the terror would return, creeping through his veins like poison. It was the feeling of being watched, of being followed, of never being alone. Even in the bright light of day, Jack could feel the darkness waiting just behind his eyes, waiting for him to falter, waiting for him to acknowledge it. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. One night, weeks after his return, Jack stood by his window, staring out into the distance. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale light over the empty street. The world was still, unnervingly still. But there, just beyond the tree line, just beyond the shadows, he saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the forest. It was too far to make out clearly, but Jack knew. He knew what it was. The shape of the entity, the twisted form that had haunted him for so long, was there, watching him. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he froze. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping as though the very night itself had taken a step closer. He gripped the window sill, his hands shaking, but when he looked again, the figure was gone. Vanished. Jack stood there, staring into the darkness, his breath caught in his throat. His mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. Had it been a hallucination? Had he finally snapped? Or had the curse truly not been broken, as Sarah had warned him? The entity's power, its influence, it was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment to return. The thought consumed him. There was no peace, no freedom. The forest, the curse, the spirits, they were still watching, still waiting. Jack had tried to outrun it, tried to leave it behind, but it was in him now, a part of his very soul. The whispers would never stop. The memories would never fade. Days turned into weeks, and Jack tried to push the darkness away. He tried to live as he had before, but everything had changed. He could no longer pretend. He could no longer ignore the truth. He was trapped in this cycle, caught between the living world and the world of the dead, bound to the forest by an invisible thread. He had thought the creature was gone, but its influence lingered, a malignant presence that would never release him. And then one night, Jack received another message. This time it wasn't a letter, it wasn't a warning, it was a voice. He woke to the sound of his name whispered softly just beyond his reach. Jack. He sat up in bed, his heart racing, his pulse thundering in his ears. He could feel the presence, the weight of it pressing against him, suffocating him. Jack. The voice called again, louder now, more urgent. It's not over, it's never over. Jack jumped from the bed, his body trembling with fear, but the voice, the whispers, they were gone. But he knew. He knew deep down that the entity had never truly been defeated. It had only retreated, biding its time, waiting for the right moment to return. The forest's curse was still alive, and Jack could feel its pull, could feel it drawing him back into the darkness. And this time, it would not let him go. Not until the last whisper had been heard. The forest was not done with him, and neither was the curse. The story of Jack and his harrowing journey through the cursed forest of the Smoky Mountains is one that leaves an indelible mark on the soul. From the very first footsteps Jack took into the wilderness, the world he knew began to unravel. The woods, beautiful yet suffocating, hid dark secrets, ancient curses, and a hunger that had been waiting for centuries to be fed. Jack, along with his companions Sarah and Mike, ventured into the depths of this forsaken land, unknowingly stepping into a nightmare from which there was no escape. As they journeyed deeper, they discovered the terrifying truth. They were not just hiking through any ordinary forest. They had entered a place where the fabric of reality itself had been twisted by an ancient, malevolent force. The curse that bound the forest and its tragic history of sacrificed souls was far beyond their understanding. The creature that stalked them, the spirits of the dead settlers, and the growing presence of the forest itself revealed a chilling truth. This place was alive, not just in a natural sense, but in a way that was far darker and more sinister. When Sarah made the ultimate sacrifice to break the curse, it seemed like the darkness would finally be eradicated. But even after her death, after the entity's defeat, Jack learned that the forest's hunger never truly fades. The spirits, though freed, were not at peace. The land had been scarred by centuries of torment, and the lingering shadows of the curse would forever haunt Jack's mind. The forest had taken everything from him, the lives of his friends, the security of his old life, and his peace of mind. The whispers of the spirits, the creature's influence, all of it followed him, clung to him as if he were eternally tied to the land that had consumed so much. Ultimately, Jack's journey shows us a harsh truth. No matter how far we run from our past, the shadows always follow us. The curse, in its many forms, symbolizes the weight of unresolved trauma, guilt, and regret. Just as Jack could not escape the forest's dark embrace, we too cannot outrun the emotional scars that shape us. The story serves as a poignant reminder that no matter how much we try to ignore or bury our past, it is always there, lurking, waiting for us to confront it. In the case of Jack, the darkness was literal. The very forest itself was alive with the consequences of human actions. And for Sarah, her sacrifice was not just an escape from the curse, but a release for the souls bound by it. Yet even in her selfless act, the evil persisted, hinting that even our most noble sacrifices cannot always provide the closure we seek. The truth remains that some wounds, some curses, do not end with a single act of courage. The lessons here are profound and relevant to our everyday lives. Life is filled with challenges, pain, and the weight of our past decisions. The more we ignore these burdens or try to escape from them, the more they tend to grow, taking shape in ways that we don't always expect. The curse of the forest in Jack's journey is not so different from the internal struggles we face daily. These struggles often manifest as fears, anxieties, regrets, or unresolved trauma. The story urges us to confront these fears head-on, no matter how overwhelming or impossible it may seem. Running away only feeds the monster. It is only through facing our fears, embracing the uncomfortable, and acknowledging our past mistakes that we can truly begin to heal and move forward. One of the most critical lessons Jack's story teaches is the concept of sacrifice and redemption. Sarah's selfless act, giving up her life to save others, was one of the purest forms of redemption. She didn't just save Jack, Mike, or herself. She freed the souls trapped by the curse. However, her death didn't immediately end the evil that plagued the land. In life, we often look for quick fixes or easy solutions to our problems. We think that by solving one thing, the rest of our struggles will disappear. But life rarely works that way. The redemption and peace we seek are often a long, painful journey. The story reminds us that some battles are not won in one moment of courage or one grand gesture. They require persistence, introspection, and the understanding that redemption isn't always final or immediate. As we reflect on this, it's important to recognize that personal growth and healing, just like breaking the curse in Jack's world, require us to make sacrifices. These sacrifices may not always be as dramatic as a life given up for others, but they often require us to let go of the things that weigh us down. This can mean letting go of past grievances, of unhealthy relationships, or even of parts of ourselves that no longer serve us. It's in these moments of surrender, when we allow ourselves to let go of what we thought we needed, that we make space for the healing to begin. This story also explores the haunting presence of guilt, which is something that many of us struggle with. Jack was haunted by the loss of his friends and by the decision to confront the entity when he was already exhausted, terrified, and near his breaking point. Guilt, much like the curse, can bind us to a place or a feeling, making it hard to escape. But the lesson here is that guilt, like fear, is a part of the process of growth. We cannot outrun it. Instead, we must acknowledge it, learn from it, and use it as a tool for our own personal evolution. Finally, the tale of Jack, Sarah, and the curse of the forest serves as a testament to the power of stories themselves. We often turn to tales of horror and the supernatural to escape, to thrill, or to entertain. But at their core, stories like these reveal truths about the human condition, our darkest fears, our brightest hopes, and our constant search for meaning. Jack's journey, while filled with unimaginable terror, is also one of self-discovery. It forces him, and by extension us, to look inward and face the things that we hide from others, and often from ourselves. Now, I'd like to hear from you. What did you think of Jack's journey and the curse of the forest? Do you think that we are always running from something deeper within ourselves? How do you personally deal with the unresolved struggles or fears in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's have a discussion about how we can confront the curses and fears that bind us in our own lives. And if you enjoyed this dark, twisted tale, be sure to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark to support the channel and ensure that we can continue bringing you more gripping, soul-stirring stories like this. Your support means everything, and it keeps us going, bringing you content that's as chilling as it is thought-provoking.